He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I'm your host, Taylor, and today we are diving into some Sasquatch encounters. Now, before that, however, you can find us on our social media channels, X, Facebook, YouTube, and Patreon. Additionally, you can email us at cryptidclues@gmail.com. Now, if you missed last week's episode, we focused on the statistics regarding missing persons, so be sure to check that out. We kind of incorporate a little bit of extraterrestrial and Bigfoot into the mix. It's a good time and really mind-boggling when you look at the updated statistical account over the past few years. But I digress. Without further delay, let's get into this. This is going to be our first encounter here, and I quote, Missouri, Clark National Forest. Slabtown Spring area, late afternoon. My wife and I were four-wheeling, driving in our Jeep with a friend. Following one of the many trails that used to be open to the public, we came upon a beautiful meadow that bordered the Big Piney River. And across the river was a line of very sheer cliffs, standing about 100 to 150 feet, high, pocketed with many holes. It was such a pleasant place, and we decided to get out and stretch our legs. We just stood there, gabbing and taking in the view. I was looking intently at those cliffs across the river, thinking about how much fun it would be just to climb up and explore some of those holes. As my vision swept across the cliffs, my eyes were attracted to something that didn't fit, an object protruding from one of the highest holes. I focused on it, and it moved, and then withdrew into the hole, very quickly. I only saw it for a few seconds. I tried to tell my wife and friend what I saw, but they thought I was joking. What I think I saw was an arm that had very long hair, much like an orangutan's arm, but very dark in color, possibly black. I've decided that the animal whose arm I saw was actually leaning out of the hole, balancing itself with its arm resting on the edge of the hole, watching us. When it realized I was looking at it, it yanked its arm back extremely fast. Right after it happened, I wanted to tell everyone I knew, the newspapers, the Forest Service, everyone. But then I thought about what would happen. People would come by the droves and hunt for it, trashing the forest, maybe even finding it and putting it into a zoo or something worse, all because of me. I decided to keep my mouth shut. Years later, having realized that people wouldn't believe me anyways, I started to tell the story. During the 80s, the forest was closed off to road vehicles, and many of the trailheads were dozed over. I've been back to the forest many times, camping, but I can no longer find the spot where this took place. The Forest Service has made it very difficult to get around there now, and the topography all looks the same. Maybe this is for the best. End quote. That was a few decades ago, and what stands out here to me is the quickness of it. It reminds me of the movie Signs, where Mel Gibson is walking in his cornfield and he sees a leg quickly walk out of frame into the corn stalks. That's when Gibson sees it. Now, I won't spoil much in case you haven't seen that movie, which I recommend you do. It gives me the heebie-jeebies till this day and when I saw it as a kid. But the notion that this thing was curious and spying on them from a distance, and then it realized it was spotted. It quickly vanished and I never saw it again after. These things are curious and they are very, very much observing. And I've spoken to this many times. You spend time driving and hiking, and you got the thick woods around us. You're going down that highway in the Pacific Northwest, and you have forest on the left, forest on the right, and you walk 5 to 10 feet beyond that tree line, you will not be spotted. You never know how far in and exactly what is watching without your awareness. It's just a terrifying, unsettling feeling. And in this case, they were driving around in a Jeep, so they were probably making a lot of noise. And this thing had all the time in the world just to get to a spot where it thought it was safe and just watch them and just see what's going on until they got spotted. I digress. Let's take a look at our next encounter. And I quote, "I'm not very good at writing, but here goes. I live in Cleveland County, Oklahoma. And this is what happened to me back in June of 2010. I rented a place to some people who live about 3 places down from me. And when they moved in, they were telling me about these large footprints they were seeing by their place. And I didn't think anything of it. Well, I just thought they were seeing something else, and so I forgot about it. Well, I was over there helping put up a fence so their horse didn't have to be in a little panel fence for the winter. So we're putting it up, and it's around hunting time. We're putting up this fence, and in the back, just a little bit in the trees, we were hearing tree branches breaking in this deep ditch about 200 to 300 feet away. The kids said, 'Look, there's something dark in the deep ditch.' So we looked, but I didn't see anything. But all through putting the fence up for the 2 days, we heard it. Not paying too much attention to it, thinking it was just some deer, squirrel, or fox or whatever. The only thing we had left to do was put the gate on, and it was getting late, so we were going to do that the next day. The next day, me and my friend went to town while her husband was at work and her kids were at school, so we were trying to get back before the kids got off the bus. Well, we pulled up to their place, and the kids came outside as we were getting out of my truck. It was about 5 or 5:30, daytime still. It was not dark at all. We heard this god-awful screaming sound coming from the beginning of the trees at the fence line in the back, where we had put the fence up. At that split second, I was thinking that 2 cats were up at the top of one of those trees, and I said, okay, I'm going to run down there and scare them cats in the fighting. The only thing is, I ran down there and stopped right in my tracks. At the fence, standing right in front of me, was this big, and I mean big, and tall thing. It had to be about 8 or 9 feet tall, brown, with red kinky hair. It had to be a Bigfoot. It had its back facing me, and as I stared at it, it took about 4 big steps away, pushing the sticks of the trees out of its way with its big arms. The branches were swaying back and forth heavily. I was in shock, with my friend and the kids right behind me. They had only seen the last half of it as it left. Now, they were all saying, "Follow it." So I said, "Go ahead," because I'm not. Not knowing what to do about this, we're just in awe. So we called the sheriff. They came out and took our testimony and left. So far, it's gotten all of their chickens, and the horse has been going crazy, running around and scraping the ground. It won't go near the back fence anymore. My husband heard this scream one morning right in front of our house back in 2006. Now, there is a telephone building, and the thing came from behind it. My husband woke me up early one morning saying he was hearing Bigfoot out there. I thought he just wanted to wake me up, but when I saw that he was being serious, I ran outside on the porch and heard the last of the screams. I put it off to being a big cat, but now after this encounter, I know it was a Bigfoot because, well, I heard it and we had saw it. He or she, for that matter, was tall, very tall. The head and body were very close together, and the hair was not straight or shiny, but just kinky and maybe a bit curly with reddish brown. It had broad shoulders, long arms. It stood up straight on its long legs. And the footprints measured 16 inches. I went back over there to make sure any of my measurements and the footprints were 16 inches long, and they were correct. Now, the space from one step to the next was 21 inches. And there are 3 different sizes of prints that I found. Now, that was just one, but I should have put that in my report, but I have the Texas researchers in the scene because we were still having problems with them. We think there is a family of them, so we do not want to let anyone know the area for fear of hurting them. And I was never a believer until now, but I won't go into the woods anymore without a gun and someone else with me. I was never like that before. End quote. Property reoccurrences are such a common thing in regard to Sasquatch. Where you go further south, for example, you'll find a lot of remote communities that have older families residing in remote, albeit large, properties that don't openly discuss these things, but are in a way coexisting with them. They know that they exist and live out there, but they don't push the boundaries with them. I don't doubt some farmers get trigger happy, but I don't also doubt retaliation by these creatures either. And in some cases, people will have an encounter, go home, and their home being a remote location itself, they'll eventually find that, hey, the thing that I saw has followed me to my place of residence. And those stories always terrify me. And I'm not saying that that is the case here in regards to this situation, but clearly this family group was passing along and decided to stay and has been causing a ruckus for the property residences, which is all too familiar in a plethora of Bigfoot encounters. I'm curious what they meant by the Texas research group that is involved here, and I'm not sure what kind of evidence kind of can follow from this when you're talking about dealing with a family group and them getting all your animals. And it just seems to be the case with so many reports that you don't get a lot of extra information that comes from that. And it just makes me wonder. You can think hypothetically and you can assume other things, but if we knew that we were dealing with a family group and then we reported it and we're being taken seriously, then what does happen? You don't want to tell the world and have tons of people showing up, so you keep your location kind of off the off the grid, so no one else really knows. Because in our first report, of course, you talk about it and you don't want people to be showing up to this location and causing a ruckus. That's not fair for you as a property owner or to these animals. You want to keep the peace. So whoever is helping with them and deal with the situation, I hope it is not a government agency if I'm not being too bold in saying that. However, I digress. Now, we have one more here for this episode, and I quote, hopefully I'm saying this right, Grand Marais, Cook County, Minnesota, 2011. My sighting occurred in Minnesota. The nearest city to the sightings is Grand Marais, Minnesota. Now, this sighting was in the Superior National Forest on January 29th, 2011. It was around 3:30 in the afternoon. The area has many lakes, and this sighting was near a tributary to one of the lakes. The nearest road to this area is Gunflint Trail, and what I and my sister saw that day was incredible. We were snowmobiling in their backcountry, northern Minnesota, when my family and I were approaching a downhill section of the trail that we were on. There was a clearing on the hillside above us where there was a break in the trees, and as I began my descent on the trail, I happened to look up and spotted something in the clearing about 200 yards above me. My sister and I were at the back of the group, so we both slowed to a stop to see what caught my attention. When we looked at what we saw, we observed a tall man-like creature watching us. It stood there for about a minute, then reached up, grabbed a branch, and walked off into the trees. The creature we saw was maybe 7 feet tall and was dark brown in color, with darker areas around the face and chest area. It had long arms, a very human-like appearance, with a high forehead area. We grew up in this area and know the local wildlife extremely well. This was not a bear, not a moose. We have never seen anything like this before. My family has somewhat been skeptical about the sightings of these beings, so when we saw it, it really frightened us. I couldn't take any photos because I'm on a snowmobile, and it's rather hard to carry a camera in an easily accessible place. So we circled around and could see these large barefoot tracks in the snow. The snow is so deep in Minnesota this year, it was just hard to get close enough to get any pictures of the tracks, but you could definitely tell that a two-legged creature passed through the area where we saw it. I wish I had more evidence, but unfortunately I never dreamed that I would ever see something like this, so it really stunned us. My sister doesn't want to go there again, but I would really like to go back and see if there's anything to be found. This definitely made me a believer. We did not report it to any authorities for fear of being ridiculed. My sister and I wish to remain anonymous for that same reason, but we like the story to be shared so that others will know that they are not crazy if they see one of these creatures. End quote. I like sightings in the snow. You don't hear many reports of people snowmobiling and seeing these creatures, though. I would feel more exposed in such a setting, being in deep snow, remote, and not within the thin walls of a truck or a car. Not that that really would make it all that different, but I guess the situation is it is different from being a snowmobile. While a snowmobile, you're zip-sliding through trees and you're in a little bit more of an isolated situation with the terrain being kind of the dictator of how you maneuver and your speed. When you're on a road, you could be on a highway, you have a little bit more control of the situation where you can zoom on out of there if you see something. What I wonder, though, is how tall it really was. Now, this is a dark brown being essentially in a white canvas, so it stands out much more. What was really interesting about what they said here, though, is that, again, the snow at this time of year is very deep, and while this is standing in the snow, it's estimated to be 7 feet as they reported it. I imagine if this snow is about 2 feet deep or something like that, at least if even it's like 1 foot deep, we could put another foot, 2 feet on this, so we could say 8 to 9 roughly. But that's my own assumption. I'm not there, and I'm just doing a rough deduction. These areas all, in general, seem to just have a prominent history of sightings going on here. While some of it's very mysterious, and some of these spots do have common reoccurring encounters, I just love the initial ones where individuals are apprehensive. They may not know, but all of a sudden they see something, and it's like, oh my goodness, that's it. That is it. You have the case where your family might disregard these things. You may hear about it when you're growing up, and they may just say, "Oh no, that's not real. It's fake." And so that instills that doubt and that belief in you. And when I say belief, I don't mean believing in Bigfoot, but that belief that, okay, these things are not real. It's like being reaffirmed that Santa Claus isn't real. You're like, oh no, yeah, okay, my parents said so, and I've just been raised to know that Santa Claus isn't real. And all of a sudden, one day, you see Santa Claus. Like, what? This changes everything. And that's always one of the most interesting things, because, of course, we got werewolves, and you got, what's another thing that's fairy tale? We'll just say, yeah, dragons and swords and stones, magics, wizards, all that kind of stuff. Now, I'm not saying one thing could be real and that means everything is real. But I think if one thing is real, then you have to reevaluate the rest. And so if we are really seeing a Sasquatch here, people have been raised to not believe in them and think it's ridiculous, and then they see it, then you have to reevaluate everything else. I'm not trying to use this as an imposed way of thinking that, oh, well, if you're a believer in Bigfoot, you got to be a believer of everything else, yada, yada, yada. That is definitely not my goal with this. My goal is just that whether you believe in it, whether you don't, the individuals that see these things, they come to this realization where, hey, I got to have an open mind because I just saw something that shouldn't exist. And that's heavy. So that's my 2 cents that I'm going to be leaving on this episode, leaving on a high note. So thank you for tuning in to this episode of Cryptid Clues. Thank you for the stories here that I was able to share. I hope you enjoyed it. I have an idea for next week's episode. My friend asked me about this certain creature cryptid, and if I have covered it yet on the show. And I always love this because the majority of the time, I have no idea what my friends are talking about when they bring up new cryptids. And again, that's just because this world has an insane amount of unknown creatures potentially existing right under our noses. So if I can dig up enough research on this particular creature, then I will tackle this mysterious cryptid, and I'm going to give you guys the full rundown next week. If not, and there isn't enough sustenance and reports, because that's usually the case too when I'm digging into research on certain cryptids, it's like, oh, there's really nothing on this creature, then I'll put a pass on it. But maybe eventually I should just do an episode and just like speed run through, like, okay, here's 10 different cryptids that don't have a lot of information on them, but just kind of like put them out into the ether for you guys to be aware of. But I digress. Now I'm just giving you behind the scenes show notes that I'm pondering in my mind. So until that comes, be sure to check us out on our social media, X, YouTube, Facebook, Patreon. Should you wish to reach us directly, you can do so via cryptidclues@gmail.com. So until next time, everyone, take care and stay safe.